Here's a story from The World.
After weeks of tension, Thailand and Cambodia are battling it out over small pieces of contested territory along their shared border. Cambodia launched rockets into Thailand, killing at least 11 civilians, and Thailand sent F-16 fighter jets over the territory to strike Cambodian military targets. This is a serious escalation of a months-long standoff, and it's inflamed nationalist fervor in both countries. The World's Patrick Wynn is following the story from Bangkok. Patrick, what triggered this confrontation?
Well, Thailand and Cambodia have, for a very long time, been quibbling over their border, especially near areas with ancient temples that both sides claim. And in recent months, the situation has intensified until both sides assembled their armies to basically stare each other down at different parts of the border. And the situation, we've been waiting for it to explode, everybody in Thailand and Cambodia. And today it did, with rockets flying and fighter jets in the air. It's dark here now, but there are reports of Thai forces storming into multiple temples with tanks and infantry to seize them for Thailand once and for all. But We're very much in a fog of war situation here. We don't know exactly what's true and what's not. Even who started it. Both sides blame each other for making the first move, so we're not even clear on that.
So is it clear so far how severe the damage is? And can you tell me anything more about the death toll?
Yeah, well, here on the Thai side, it's pretty bad. I mean, the Cambodians did a coordinated attack lobbing rockets into several different rural areas in 4 different provinces. So they hit a gas station with a 7-Eleven, they hit people's houses, they hit a hospital, and here's footage of those rockets filmed by Cambodia's military. And so the targets of those rockets are not Thai army camps necessarily. They also hit places where everyday people live and work. Some of the dead are students, including a 12-year-old girl. So this is really risky stuff on the Cambodian side because it's a smaller country with a smaller military. It does not have fighter jets, and Thailand does. And Thailand sent its F-16s in to blow up military installations and reportedly many tanks as well. So both sides of the border are evacuated. Tens of thousands of people are sleeping outside their homes tonight, and it's a pretty dire situation.
Wow. Tell me more about what exactly they're fighting over. These pieces of land along the border, is that right?
Yeah, I've been to that area quite a few times. You know, it's very beautiful. It's mostly rice fields and water buffalo and not a lot going on. But there are these very small pieces of land, some of which have ancient temples on them, and the uncertainty around who they belong to goes back to this shoddily drawn map drawn by the French Empire in 1907 when Cambodia was a French colony and Thailand was the Kingdom of Siam. So this goes way, way, way back. Cambodia and Thailand have tried to take this to international courts a few times, never walked away with the result that both sides could accept. It's also become very politicized. So when Cambodia wants to puff its chest out, it brings this up. Same with Thailand. On Thailand, you have a ruling party that is unstable. It doesn't want to look weak. In Cambodia, you have a one-party state with a newish leader, the son of Cambodia's long-running strongman. He needs to stand up and look strong for himself, so neither side feels it can give up a single inch.
So what is the endgame here? How might this actually be resolved?
Unfortunately, most of the diplomatic options are being exhausted. So Thailand just pulled its ambassador from Cambodia, and Cambodia's ambassador to Thailand is going home too. So there's not much else to do at this point but fight. And almost certainly the death toll that's being reported now is too low. The only hope for mediation right now is Cambodia's government is asking the UN Security Council to convene and stop Thailand's, quote, unprovoked aggression. Thailand is also going to the UN as well to plead its case, so maybe there's a chance for mediation. The odds don't look very good right now, though.
The World's Patrick Wynn in Bangkok.
From PRX.
Here's a story from The World.
Something we've been hearing about a lot lately.
A daring drone offensive, waves of drone attacks,
a barrage of more than 300 drones.
Drones, or in military speak, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. Their use is ramping up in Russia and Ukraine. Just yesterday, both countries exchanged drone attacks after peace talks failed again. But authorities far and wide are using drones. This week alone, conflict drones have been deployed in Thailand, Haiti, northern Iraq. It's a technological revolution in real time, one that could change not just how countries fight wars, but how they get into them in the first place. We begin our show today with Rob Lee. He's a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and joined us earlier today from Kyiv.
Well, they're being used pretty much everywhere. And I think it makes sense for a lot of reasons. So, there are different classes of drones. Some of the things, we're talking about with Iran and Israel, Iran was using these kind of large Shahed type one-way attack UAVs. Russia uses those against Ukraine, often against infrastructure. And these are very large military style UAVs with very long ranges. But you also have a lot of commercially available cheap UAVs that you can use and are pretty easy to put together, like first-person view drones, which are used in Ukraine. Those are being used elsewhere as well. There are obviously applications for terrorist groups could use this, paramilitary groups. I think it's likely we're going to see attempts at assassinations with FPVs because they're cheap, because they have quite good range compared to other military weapons, and because it's commercially available. I think we're going to see this in almost all conflicts going forward, whether it's a conventional fight between two large militaries or just between, paramilitary groups or even criminal gangs in the future.
Yeah, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, and we've also seen them in Haiti. How does the picture change for civilians in war zones as unmanned aerial vehicles take on a bigger presence during wartime?
One of the big changes in this war for the last couple of years is that the area that's dangerous near the front line has expanded dramatically. So earlier in the war, if you were maybe 5 kilometers past the front line, the risk was obviously there, but it was kind of reduced. But now FPVs, these little UAVs, often operate at 20 kilometers or greater. But if you have better units, they could be operating at 30, 40 kilometers.
Well, you're joining us from Kyiv. Have you had any personal experience with that?
Fortunately, not myself, but when you drive anywhere near the front line, and I was around the front line last week, we don't go nearly as close to the front line as we used to when we try and visit units. Security precautions are greater, and some of the roads, even far from the front line, are now under much greater threat than they used to be.
So where exactly were you on the front lines, and what stood out to you about the role of drones where you were?
So we were in different places. We went to Kharkiv. We were up in the Kupiansk area, in Liman. I'd say one of the really important developments is that Ukraine really innovated with using commercial UAVs first. And they did that partially to compensate for lack of ammunition for artillery. But now, increasingly, it's to compensate for lack of manpower. Russia has a significant advantage in infantry, and Ukraine uses UAVs to kind of compensate for that. But one of the things that's happened more recently is that Russia has started to innovate with UAVs as well. They have some quite capable UAV units, and they're scaling a lot of their activities. And one of the things that often is common on the front line is when Russia deploys one of these elite units called the Rubicon Center to a part of the front line, the situation will often become much more difficult for Ukrainian units there. It becomes more difficult for Ukrainian UAV units to operate there, but also more difficult for infantry to get logistics to the front line. And so in many cases, when Russia is advancing, it's because they are reinforcing parts of the front line with their better strike UAV units. The UAV to UAV fight is going to be a key factor in how well Ukraine can hold back Russian advances, or how far can Russia advance.
So it sounds like the drone war is evolving as quickly as it looks from the headlines.
Oh, absolutely. And again, if you come to the front line every month, the tactics will change. It's a constant fight for adaptation because the little advantages with UAVs can have a significant effect on the battlefield. And again, that's really where the innovation is happening. Unmanned aerial vehicles, but also unmanned ground vehicles.
I'm speaking with Rob Lee, senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He's in Kyiv. So the U.S. and others are still sending tanks. We should point that out. It's not like this is an entirely drone war. It is striking, though, that just 3 years ago, the picture from Ukraine was one of tanks getting stuck in mud, and now there's this greater reliance on drones. That can't be coincidental.
No, it's not. And, FPVs, these cheap UAVs, are quite effective at targeting armor, not just tanks, but kind of old vehicles, right? They can be used against people on ATVs. They can be used against light trucks, light armored vehicles, tanks, and so on, because they move fast enough. And you can identify these vehicles ahead of time with UAVs, then you can target them. And so the role has changed. Tanks are still useful on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are still using Abrams in combat. They're still using Leopards and other NATO-provided tanks. But the role is not as significant as they once were. But again, in order to kind of reestablish the ability to use armor effectively, it's going to come back to how well you can maybe suppress, degrade, or destroy enemy UAV units. Without that, if you can't employ armor at mass, then it's not clear that breakthroughs, any kind of really significant rapid breakthrough is achievable.
So these $1 million machines are getting knocked out by drones that can cost about $500 each. Is the calculation getting to the point that the West might see just the futility of donating tanks?
They are less useful than they once were, but I wouldn't say they're futile. And again, some of this comes back to how well can you degrade and counter FPV and other kind of UAV teams. If you can't do it, any kind of vehicle is going to be at risk. And both sides have adapted accordingly.
So I'm curious, to what extent are other nations watching the UAV innovations in the war between Russia and Ukraine?
Oh, it's certainly happening. So obviously in the U.S., Secretary Hegseth, I think, announced maybe a few weeks ago that they're making changes to procure drones more rapidly. I think there's understanding now in the U.S. military that FPVs and these kind of commercial UVs are a more mature weapon system than they were maybe in 2022, 2023. And these things are here to stay, and that they, despite the other kind of advantages the U.S. military has that Ukraine and Russia lack, that there's still a role for these UAVs. At a minimum, we need to be able to counter them, because any kind of future conflict, whether it's against a nation state like China or it's against terrorist groups or different types of paramilitary groups, it's likely that FPVs will be used against us, and we have to be able to counter those. So the U.S. is learning from this. I think China obviously is learning from this, because China is learning from lessons from Russia, and many of the UAVs, the commercial UAVs that are provided, are either with Chinese components or they're Chinese themselves. So China certainly learned from this. North Korea was fighting against Ukraine and Kursk. North Korea is almost certainly going to be learning about this as well.
How much do you worry, Rob, that drones will make it easier for leaders to start conflicts? And are you expecting to see more of that?
So there's a risk that you could conduct more deniable operations. If we look at what Ukraine did with Operation Spiderweb, when they destroyed and targeted all those Russian strategic bombers, obviously that came from Ukraine, given the context. But you could look forward and think about a non-state actor or state actor could conduct that against another country, and they might have a degree of plausible deniability. So that could be a potential threat going forward. In terms of making conflicts more likely, a lot of countries that don't have air forces can compensate, and they can still have some degree of air power by using UAVs instead. So that's another kind of factor going forward. I'm not sure it will make wars more likely. I think right now, though, as the technology is very early, many countries will not fully understand what it means, right? They might become more confident in UAV capabilities. They might think that they can achieve a kind of quick, decisive victory if they think that they have leveraged this technology better than other sides. But, that could also lead to mistakes.
Rob Lee is a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He joined us from Kyiv.
From PRX.
Here's a story from The World.
More than 100 human rights groups say Israel's blockade and military offensive are pushing Palestinians in the Gaza Strip toward starvation. Israeli officials rejected that criticism as echoes of Hamas propaganda.
Meanwhile, in Syria, dozens of bodies have been found on the ground outside a hospital in the southern city of Shueda, following days of deadly clashes between Druze and Bedouins and later with Syrian security forces in the city.
International bodies like the UN and the International Criminal Court were created after World War II to avoid exactly these kinds of scenarios. As we heard from the world's Shirin Jafari yesterday, that system is currently falling short. Today, in part 2 of her report, we hear from experts who say that this moment could become a turning point in international law.
For Monica Hakimi, who teaches international law at Columbia University, the failure to deal with mass atrocities come from deep systematic problems. Hakimi, who was a lawyer at the State Department under President George W. Bush, says we should be focusing more on preventing war crimes in the first place. In the past, she says, states that were most involved in wars, like the U.S., cared more about the laws governing fighting, and they instilled them in their militaries.
So when their own militaries fought wars, they would act consistently, more or less, even with some aggressive interpretations of these norms.
These laws aren't perfect, she adds. They have always allowed for some killing of civilians, but now we're seeing less commitment to training military forces to limit violations, Hakimi says. Adding to that, she says, is the considerable drop in funding and support for organizations like the International Committee of the Red Cross, which oversees and implements a lot of the laws that govern wars.
And that, of course, leads to more space for conduct that is inconsistent with the norms.
Looking ahead, she says, for any improvement to happen, states need to agree on 2 things.
The first is preserving states as states, and the second is protecting individuals within states. That balance has never been easy, but it has long been the balance of international law, and it is a balance that is, in my view, collapsing right now.
Something that has tipped the balance is the rise in militant groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, which have more sophisticated weapons. These groups don't follow international law. Still, Tom Donenbaum, who teaches international law at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, says that doesn't absolve governments of their obligations.
International humanitarian law is the commitment that all states and parties make to humanity to comply with some basic minimum rules in war.
What differentiates states from militants or terrorist organizations, he adds, is that they are supposed to comply with international law. Donenbaum has written about starvation as a weapon of war in Sudan. The Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces have been fighting for almost 2 years. More than 150,000 people have been killed. Over 12 million have been forced from their homes. The World Food Programme says about half of the population is facing extreme levels of hunger.
I think it's fair to say that we're now at a point where it's no longer simply a project of weathering the storm and weathering the assaults on international law, but recognizing that this system is ultimately going to require rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reimagining.
That's not impossible, he says, but it will require governments coming together.
Particularly since some of the gravest crises that we face are crises that are going to affect all of us, whether it's climate change, whether it's the risk of nuclear conflict. These kinds of prospects are prospects that are going to require collective action.
In the end, justice and accountability might take a long time to achieve, but it's not impossible, says Janine Di Giovanni. She heads the Reckoning project, which documents war crimes in Ukraine. She says international law was created to shield the less powerful, and it has been effective in the past.
Let's look at Radovan Karadzic, one of the butchers of the Balkans. When he was captured by the Hague, prior to that, we thought that the prosecutions would have been unthinkable. But, civil society, independent investigators helped to bring him there.
Who is to say if Syria's Bashar al-Assad doesn't end up on trial at The Hague in a few years, she says. An example of the effectiveness of independent investigations became clear on Monday, when authorities in Belgium arrested 2 Israelis who were traveling there to attend a music festival. 2 rights organizations had filed a complaint against the pair, both Israeli soldiers, accusing them of committing specific war crimes in Gaza. They were released after questioning. But what is important, Di Giovanni says, is that human rights activists and legal experts keep collecting evidence. And, most importantly, not to lose hope. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.